Hello, everybody. Today we're going to talk about a really interesting book that was written as research into DevOps and what makes companies successful. And this one is the capabilities drive improvements in software delivery performance. Now, the thing that's important that goes beyond here, if this had a second sentence to it, would be and that help companies be successful. So software delivery performance turns out to be very important in determining the overall success of an organization. Companies that are good at doing software do a good job in the marketplace. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. I think you'll find it kind of interesting, kind of counterintuitive also. So the capabilities of drive improvements are based on the research done by DORA. This is an organization called DevOps Research and Assessment that was started by a woman named Nicole Forsgren, who and a couple other people who have been very involved in the whole DevOps movement from the very beginning. Now, the other neat thing about this is that this research has really been picked up by the big companies, including Google. And I've left you a link in my courses that get to the site that covers this work in much more detail of course, than I can do here. But it's all put together by Google. So, Google is very involved in this stuff. Amazon is very involved with this stuff. It started based on a couple of guys' work in a video that they did. It was called 10 Updates a Day at Flickr. And that was a revolutionary video, and now it's grown to really encompass most modern organizations. So beyond thinking about what's so interesting about this stuff, think about what's the organizations that are recruiting you to work for them. Do they live up to these ideas? Is this part of what the company that you want to work for is involved with? If it's not, then you may want to keep on looking. So there's an excerpt from the book Accelerate by Nicole Forsgren in my courses, and it really is, it's kind of the best part of the book. So it's really nice. It's a free PDF, and so take a look at that. Take a look at the Google website that you'll see in there in my courses, and think about what it means to live up to these requirements in the organizations that you've worked for in the past and plan on working for in the future. So 5 categories: continuous delivery, architecture, product and process, lean management and monitoring, and most importantly, cultural. So, if you think that DevOps is just about technology, well, you're sort of right, but only partly right. Without these other components, including a culture that facilitates this kind of work, then your company's going to have a rough time. So continuous delivery, what capabilities do you need to be able to provide continuous capability for a continuous delivery for an application? Well, it's these: version control, deployment automation, pushing content out there in an automated, rigorous, reliable fashion, continuous integration, which involves developers pushing their code into production, working on production code, and then pushing their code into production very quickly. Trunk-based development, once again, that's developers working on that production code, taking a small branch of it, making their small changes, and pushing it back into production again. Test automation. That's what this class we talk a lot about, and this is why. Because test automation, finding ways to test your code in an automated, which means reliable fashion, and one that you can do over and over and over again, That's really important. Test data management. It's hard. It's really hard to maintain a test data environment that's close enough. It's not the same as production, but close enough to production to make your tests meaningful. That's a hard thing to do, and you need to spend a lot of time working on that. Shift left on security. Well, shift left on security means get security into the process as early on in the software development process as at all possible. And then last of all is continuous delivery. Once again, get that code into production as quickly as possible. Architecture, well, these are the keys to having architectures that work well with the DevOps environment. A loosely coupled architecture, which means that you take your big application, break it up into lots of smaller applications, and then connect those smaller applications via well-known, well-researched APIs that probably don't change much. Now, your individual smaller applications may change a lot, probably will. But as long as the APIs don't change very frequently, then it's a lot easier to maintain the speed and efficiency of software development. And then the other thing that you need are empowered teams. So what that means is that when you have these small, big application broken up into a whole bunch of small applications, you have these empowered teams that run each one of these small applications. Now, these teams are empowered to make decisions, and you can do that because of those APIs. As long as the empowered teams don't try and change the APIs, either the data coming into their little application or the data going out, then those teams can do the work that they think is appropriate on that individual application. Those are empowered teams. That's a really important thing, but you can't do it. You can't have small empowered teams if you don't have a loosely coupled microservice architecture. Product and process capabilities, you want to have customer feedback. And what that means is that you need to know what your customers think of your application. And that's an easy thing to forget about. And it's easy to not pay attention to customers. And it's easy to say, oh, what do those customers know? They're just a bunch of nerds, or they're just a bunch of whatevers. And we know what's best for them. But you don't. You need to get that customer feedback. Value stream, you need to build value into your application. Start with minimum viable products and add more. Add more value to your application as it gets more complex. Working in small batches. Working in small batches means not only from a software perspective, but don't get caught up in doing these huge production runs where you make 50 gazillion of widget Z that needs to fit exactly into the rest of your product. Because what happens if you need to change the product? Then those million widgets don't fit anymore. So if you work in small batches, both from a software perspective and manufacturing perspective, then you can be much more flexible and respond more quickly to customer feedback and create a better value stream that will help your company be more flexible. And that turns out to be a really important component in all of this stuff, is just flexibility. And then team experimentation. Now, you guys are all taking science classes where you're learning how to develop experiments. Well, that translates perfectly into what we do in terms of automation, in terms of testing, in terms of all this stuff. You need to take the rigorous experimental methodologies that you learn from your science classes and bring them into your software development and configuration management background, so that that experimental model makes a lot of sense. I mean, we can make little flips and twists in our applications, in our deployment practices, in our configurations, all this kind of stuff. But you need to then, test them. You need to have a baseline test, make your change, run the same test again to see what impact your change had on the software that you're working with. Now, one of our labs is about load generation. Why? Because without accurate, repeatable load generation models, you can't do experimentation. So, in, so the reason why I have you do that load generation lab is because I want you to get good at thinking about the experimental process and the way that we can make changes in a controlled fashion. Lean management and monitoring capabilities, monitoring really matters. Change approval processes. It's really easy for companies to say, we had an outage last week and it was based on somebody made a change. And when they made that change, the system that used to work no longer worked. We were out for a while. We lost a bunch of money and we don't want that to happen again. But it's easy to change that to and we're never going to have that happen again. And the way we're never going to have that happen again is we're going to have this approval process that needs to be followed for every change in our deployment and our configurations or whatever. It needs to be approved by all of these levels throughout our organization. And what that does is that slows down your change process to a level where you just can't make any changes. And just like making too many changes is death, making too few changes is death also. It is hard to figure out how to do change approval. You can't have just everybody making changes willy-nilly. But on the other hand, you can't close down the change approval process to such a date that such a state that no changes can be made. So change approval is hard. Wherever you work, pay attention to what the process is. Know that it's hard to do it well, but it can't be so cast in stone that you can't make any changes. Monitoring, with these big distributed applications, it's easy to lose things. And I mean, really lose things. Where is that service again? You can lose it. So you need to have monitoring capabilities that take these log files from your global application and that can generate gazillions of terabytes of monitoring information very easily. And you need to funnel that down to find the metrics that matter and create a monitoring environment that lets you gather the metrics that matter in a way that you can keep track of them and make changes and then recheck your monitoring again. Proactive notifications, we need to find ways to cut back on the false positive notifications, but at the same time, not get rid of any notifications. So being proactive about this just means thinking about these things, thinking about how best to organize yourself to create an application that works well. Work in progress limits. Now we usually think of that as, you've got a main branch on your version control. Developer takes a branch off of that and then spends too long on it. They keep working on this thing for 2 weeks, and then when they try and merge it back in, it's got all these conflicts that are just impossible to resolve. So in effect, what happens is that 2 weeks of work becomes useless and they have to start again. So work in progress limits for us usually means Take your branch, make a small change, push it back into production. Make sure things work, and don't make too big of changes, because when you make too big of changes, then it makes it impossible to keep track of what's good and what's not good. Visualizing work, what that gets at is this whole idea that, mostly when we monitor, we can generate so many metrics that we as humans just can't deal with. We can't scan through log files to effectively see what's going on. The only way those log files are useful to us is if we use them as input to a visualization tool that can then create visualizations that allow us to see what's going on, to grasp the huge complexity of the application that we're working with, and bring it down to a scale that we as humans can deal with it. Culture stuff. So I said before that culture stuff was really important. And these are, really important things. So a Western organizational culture, what Western was I think he was a sociologist, and he studied the ways that organizations dealt with information. And what he found was that organizations that were highly supportive of information flow through the organization were much more effective at getting things done. And so I encourage you to check out, if you want to learn more about Western organizational culture, check out that Google Doc. It's got some really good stuff in there about Western. But the essential idea is the information that gets generated, does it flow throughout the organization? Or is the organization one that's, has information capsulized so that the only people know about how efficient the application is the operations team. The operations team never talks to the marketing team to let the marketing team know that, if you change a few things, we could be much more efficient. We could handle the same workload, but with a lot smaller set of machines. So it's that kind of information flowing through the organization. That's what Western's about. Supporting learning. You're going to have to learn new things throughout your entire life. Is your organization one that supports that? Do they say, we know that learning a new language is hard, so you're going to need some time for that, and we're going to support you going out and taking that time to learn what you're doing. That's really important. Collaboration among teams. How do teams work together? Do the ops people hate the dev people? Or do the dev people and the ops people work pretty well together? That's really important. Job satisfaction. Are, people that you work with, are they overall pretty happy with their job? Or are they grumbling and grumping all the time, saying, I can't wait till I get out of here? That's a big difference. And then transformational leadership. Leadership matters. So the CEOs down to the CFOs and the CIOs and all the people that you work with that help you manage you and help you grow as an individual. That matters. Having good leadership matters. And if if you hate your boss and your boss hates you, that's probably a bad thing. So, all right, so these are just some of the research around DevOps, and what the DORA Group has found really helps organizations become more efficient in bringing DevOps processes into their overall workflow. So I hope that helped. Take care. Bye-bye.